right.
So we'll do probably 10-15 minutes of tips and then a couple more questions and then pizza time and handing in resumes.
All right. So I'm going to keep the momentum going, and I can skip through. So, preparing for the technical interview at Microsoft. So, I can skip over this because you already know who I am. I sort of say background. Who is this guy, and why should I listen to him? I will point out there's two stats on here that I'd like to draw your attention to. I've gone through over 20 different interviews at Microsoft for various positions that I've wanted to go for. And I've interviewed over 100 people at Microsoft. So I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about, and hopefully I can share some of these lessons learned and advice that will make your success rate that much higher when going through a Microsoft interview. So, when I think about what I'm looking for as an interviewer, I'm looking to assess and see if you have a certain core skills. So from a technical foundation perspective, I'm looking for your proficiency in algorithms, data structures, problem solving, and do you understand some of the more trickier concepts like program efficiency, big O notation? Can you express those ideas? Can you converse in that kind of way? Do you understand the implications of your choices as you create your algorithms and implement your programs? I also want to see that you have a proficiency in your favorite language, which I hope is something like C, C++, C#, Java, Fortran, that shows my age, right? But I don't want to see something that, I want to see something that isn't a scripting language. I don't need to come in and do the interview in Python or Perl or Lisp or, some whatever, right? We want to see that you understand one of these higher level languages and the fundamental concepts that come with them. If you can program in C, you can program in any other language. Yes?
Where do you stand on functional languages?
Like Prolog?
Like Haskell, Scala?
Well, as an engineer, my opportunities to use functional languages are not very often. So, if I found a company that liked to use functional languages, I'd be in great shape, but unfortunately that's not how Microsoft is. However, if you have a passion for languages, there isn't anything to say that ultimately at Microsoft you could make your way to developer division, DevDiv, and work on, there's a Python tools for Visual Studio team there. There's teams that are evaluating different languages. We're doing all kinds of cool things. There's even languages and projects that we're working on that nobody knows about, that are really cool.
Mark, let me chime in here a little quick. So my job at interview events is I sit in the room with the interviewers and make sure they're giving you guys an equivalent, fair experience, right? And so I'll just tell you from my experience, those who have some variant of C tend to do better. That's just factually in the interview. It's okay if you have some of these other functional languages or scripting languages as mentioned, but historically, people have done better on our interviews if they have a strong foundation in the C variant.
Cool. So, you saw I only had 2 slides for technical foundation. We want to see those core fundamentals are there. And then you'll get other opportunities in your interview to differentiate yourself. What other things am I looking for? Communication and problem solving. I've been in interviews where somebody started coding on a whiteboard and they walk up to the whiteboard like this, start coding, and don't say anything. They just stand there and they're coding, and then they finally step back and go, ta-da, and they're done. And it's hard as an interviewer to understand that. I like to think of an interview as a journey, and you as the candidate are taking me on that journey. I'm going on that journey with you as you solve that problem. So being able to speak out loud, refine your solution, collaborate, communicate, all those things are very important. Microsoft is a very collaborative environment. People who go into their office, shut their door, and you never see them, typically don't do so well. You're part of a team. You need to have that collaboration. As an SDET, I'm on top of the developers that I work with. Whenever they check in code, I'm reviewing it. they're reviewing my tests, I know what their work items are, they know what mine are. You need to have that ebb and flow with the communication to be a successful engineer, and we want to see that in the interviews. Speak out loud, share your ideas, talk through things. I've had people that at an interview have gotten stumped. They've gotten to like 98% of the solution, but they couldn't get that last little bit. But because they've been great communicators and talking me through, I knew they were so close that I still gave them a higher recommendation anyways, because they were able to take me on such a fantastic journey with solving their problem. Being able to ask questions, being able to challenge ideas is really, really important. Instead of, you want to, if somebody gives you a problem, you need to ask questions. Clarify the questions, clarify the scenario, ask about choices. Can I assume that this array is sorted? Can I assume that it's not sorted? Right? All these kind of things. What kind of contract do I have with the developer, or what kind of contract am I having with other pieces in the software? Those kind of things are great to ask and to understand, and you need to be asking those things as a part of an engineering team. So if we can see you doing those inside the interview, then that you start ticking off boxes and having a great experience. There was a theme throughout my other talk about finding your passion. So being able to talk about what you are passionate about and sharing that passion is tremendously important. People that are passionate about their work will do better, and they will thrive better at Microsoft. So being able to talk about something put stuff on your resume that you're passionate about, because somebody's going to ask you about it. If you list a project on your resume, chances are the interviewer is going to be reading that and go, you wrote a rootkit for an operating system? Wow, that's pretty cool. Interviewers pick up on those things, and you need to be able to talk about those things if you get asked about it. So they might say, what do you like about Microsoft? I've asked people this in an interview, and they go, oh yeah, and they know that I'm on the Xbox team. So they say, oh, I like Xbox. And I say, well, why do you like Xbox? Oh, because my friends and I, we play games all the time, and it's the coolest thing. And right? You guys are you have tremendous brain power being here, and there's things about what you do that makes you passionate. If somebody came and said, oh, I love security, I love how we have to you have to figure out the crypto algorithms. One of the things I think is tremendously cool about the Xbox is how it does the security and the encryption. On the 360, the disks are weighted, right? Those disks for the games have to be manufactured in a certain way, and there's physical validation inside the console about how fast the disk spins. It checks the RPMs. It also checks how it's encoded, so that they can validate that yes, this is a legitimate copy of the game, right? So some people think that stuff is awesome. I do. And how you be creative and put those things into place. And then also being able to talk about the things that you found super hard and why you found them hard. It's one thing to ask about the things that you really enjoyed. I like to ask sometimes about what was your hardest assignment so far? And being able to talk about why you found that so hard, how you got through your challenges. Because work at Microsoft is going to be fun, but there's days where you're going to go, man, this is hard. They talk about your first 6 weeks, 2 months at Microsoft. They use the phrase, drinking from the fire hose. It's really like that. The information overload, trying to prioritize things, ramp up on your job. But it's fun. It's such a tremendous challenge. All right, so on to some good stuff. So I've got some sample problems. So you have to think about, in the interview, we've got a limited amount of time to assess you. Some cases it might only be 25 minutes to get through and see if you have all of those skills. So one question I like to ask sometimes, and I'm not going to ask it anymore here at UNSW, is write a function that computes a Fibonacci series for a given value. So you can, there's a Fibonacci series. I've seen people do this with recursion. I've seen people do this iteratively in a loop. That's fine. Being able to take me on that journey, how you would solve this problem, and how you would implement it, and why you would implement it, what choices you make, is really important. And then being a tester, I start to ask, I start to ask things like, how would you test this? Right? So I want to see, how you would evaluate things. And sometimes with the recursion example in a Fibonacci series, because it keeps calling itself, what happens if you use a really big number for that Fibonacci series? Is your performance going to start tanking on your machine because you're calling itself over and over and over again? Are there any other implications about the data sizes, data types you've used? Anything like that? How do you test it to make sure that it works as it should? Another question I like that I've been given is emergency testing problem. Last minute product addition, a user interface that requires a user to enter a positive number. Only time for 5 tests before you ship. Which test cases do you run? In this case, I'm looking for equivalency classes. I've got 5 tests that I can run, and I want a positive number. I would check 0, 1, -1. I take the smallest integer, and then the largest integer. If I had more tests, and then largest integer plus 1 to check for wrapping. I hear monkeys. Or is that a bird or something? No, that's a bird, okay. I was going to say monkeys. I was ringtones. It's crazy. I was doing my talk at the University of Melbourne, and the next I start hearing Hey Hey Mama, like Led Zeppelin playing in the middle of the talk. Somebody's ring phone going off. So, what cases do you run? If you could expand it more, you start looking at equivalency classes for numbers. And this is where you start to think about how spatial the numbers are. So, if you have, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, you've started to push the equivalency and testing things by the number of digits, right? You then also might want to look at 1 and then 0, 1. So you've incorporated decimals to get some coverage. So being a tester, you're required to be creative and start to think of ways of doing your job the most efficient way possible. And equivalency classes are a really good way of doing that. Another example is write a function that evaluates a single variable polynomial. So I'm given an array that has the coefficients for each term in the polynomial, and I also have been given the symbols in between the operators. How do I start to parse that and evaluate that, where I know the value of x? So thinking about what kind of data structures come to mind. Well, one common solution is you pull everything onto a stack. And then you keep track of how many x terms you have, so you know what exponent that is. And then as you're popping things off the stack, you know what your value of x is. You've got x squared. The next number you get is x to the power of 1. The next number you get is so forth. So then you can start evaluating that. It's a fair question, evaluating a polynomial, your stacks, different data types. So that's some different ways to approach that problem. And then solution refinement. You might get somebody asking you in an interview question, okay, I like your solution, what would you do to make it better? So that's we're talking about those efficiencies, understanding the implications of your algorithm choice, and having that discussion and being able to communicate it, right? So, how can I prepare? Right? So for me, I think if you've done that 3rd-year algorithms course, or that, there's got to be some algorithms course in your program where you go, oh man, that's kind of like a rite of passage. I got through it, right? At least for my degrees there was. So there was a big, massive textbook about algorithms, going back and doing problems from that. Old exams, programming competitions. The big thing is get a whiteboard. Go to the bookstore, buy a whiteboard. Because some people come to these interviews and they've never written on a whiteboard before. And it's like chicken scratching, right? It could be, I don't know. But you want to make things easier for the interviewer to read and help your confidence. Challenge friends. I come up with these interview questions at morning coffee breaks with my colleagues. We sit around and we give each other interview questions for fun. And we try to see what kind of questions we would ask. And it's kind of fun to have that other point of view. By doing this yourself, by challenging friends, seeing how somebody else solves the problem, you work on that collaboration and communication, and you're able to talk about your solution in a meaningful way to somebody else. Because it's one thing to go through the coding problems, it's another thing to try and explain it to somebody. Puzzles. I love puzzles, and in fact, one thing that I used to do before my exams was a crossword puzzle. I learned that cramming didn't really do anything for me, but I needed to rev my brain before I went into an exam. So I'd bring a crossword puzzle. So I'd sit there and work on the crossword puzzle while everybody else was stressing out about going into the exam. And I'd walk in and my brain would be already revving, being great, and it was pretty easy to shift gears into the subject that I was doing, and I found it helped me do better on the exams. Unfortunately, it took me until my PhD to figure that out. I wish I'd learned that way back in my other degrees. Learn about Microsoft. This is a big thing. You're going to get why Microsoft. You've asked me the question. I might very well ask you that, or the interviewer might ask you that. Again, coming back to, oh, I like to play games. That doesn't do it, right? Being knowledgeable about the company you are interviewing with is tremendous. Different products, technology choices, offerings, what you like and why. It's also okay for you to tell the interview what you think sucks, right? I mean, because that's part of, as an engineer, you're pushing those boundaries. You're trying to influence that technology so that the company you're working for succeeds and is the best company it could be. Reading books. Some of the books I like to read and I found awesome as a new engineer at Microsoft, there's one called Code Complete, which is a really good book. Hard Code is another one, both in Microsoft books. And then How We Test Software at Microsoft. That was really humbling. I work with two of the authors from How We Test Software at Microsoft. And to all of a sudden be on the Xbox team and have these guys down the hall kind of blew my head. I had read that book a long time ago. Windows Internals, that's another neat book, all about the operating system. CLR, if you're into managed code and how garbage collection and all that kind of stuff works. Understanding CLR, puzzles for programmers, and then there's another one called Acing the Technical Interview. So, balance. Don't burn yourself out preparing. Think about your priorities and areas you want to improve or areas you want more knowledge. Just like I don't know about you, but when I go study for a final exam, I used to take the course outline. And what I had already covered in midterms and assignments, I sort of gave a lesser priority to. And then things that I knew were going to be on the final or the more later units, I would give it higher priority when going through my revision. So I could try to figure out what was appropriate for being on the exam. Same kind of thing with the interview, right? You got to think about it. We've only got a small window of time. So we're not going to ask you to implement something huge and crazy, something that would take an hour to code, right? So you need to balance how much preparation you do with algorithms, the fundamentals, how much you work on your communication, how much you work on the knowledge you do about Microsoft. So you need to come up with your own plan for the interview, but part of that is planning. It's really important. So, getting towards the end of my deck, the last little section is interview day. Okay, so you've submitted your resume, you talk with people, and you get the call. You're like, hey, we want to talk to you even more. So what can you do? Or you get the phone call and you talk to people, and they're like, yeah, we want to talk to you in person. And you say, oh my God, what do I do? So the day that it happens, just from an interviewer person, I've done phone interviews, and halfway through the person's like, oh, I'm sorry, I got to the bathroom really bad. Can you wait on the phone? Right? So yeah, go to the bathroom before your interview. Just, it sounds obvious, but for some people it's not. If you're on a phone interview, have a pen and paper there, because you're going to be talking to someone. Have something where you can write your thoughts. Because as I'm speaking to you on the phone, maybe you're taking notes. Maybe your ideas are going, you're listening. Or as you're thinking about a solution, you might want to be refining it. A quiet environment, right? If you're in a shared office space, or you've got a roommate, maybe find a place that's quiet for you to have that phone call. Know your resume. I already talked about this a little bit, but know what's on your resume and be prepared to talk about what's on your resume, because that's what the interviewer is going to be asking you about. Have questions for the interviewer that are appropriate. I don't like asking an employer or a potential employer during the first interview about how much am I going to make, right? Kind of salary stuff, HR stuff, that kind of maybe sets a bad tone, right? That's my opinion, that's stuff that can all be negotiated at the end. If they want you, Save it for the end when you negotiate. I've actually, when I was young, I went through job interviews where the first question was, okay, how much am I going to get paid? Oh, really? That's it? Well, I didn't get the job, and it set a poor tone. So, have questions for the interviewer that are appropriate. Asking about Microsoft, asking about the different business groups, asking about why they chose Microsoft. Those are all fantastic questions. But the fact is have questions prepared so that when the interviewer says, do you have any questions? Instead of there being the crickets and no noise, have something to ask them. Preparing for the interview in person. Well, Microsoft's going to help you plan your travel, so make sure you have enough time, that you're not arriving the day of your interview and you're going to be jet lagged and wrecked, or that you have enough time to actually get there and be fresh. Take care of yourself. Eat, sleep, water. Those are kind of basic things. You don't necessarily want to be going out on a bender the night before your interview. I talked about the crossword puzzle or something similar. If you have something that